Well, good morning, everybody. This is the February IAC meeting, and I welcome all of our members. I think we have a full complement today, and it's really good to see everyone, and we have a lot to do. But before I begin, I want to clarify something. At our last meeting on January the 14th, the IAC voted to unanimously to go into closed session following its open session to discuss the performance evaluation of an employee under the personnel exception to meeting in session. After the meeting, it was discovered that the live stream of the virtual meeting, which is broadcast on YouTube, was inadvertently terminated after the closed session had been announced, but before the closing statement was read and before the vote had been taken. Because we terminated the YouTube broadcast prematurely, the public did not see or hear the reading of the closed statement or the vote to close the meeting. And that was a violation of the Open Meetings Act. So our staff in the IAC worked with me and our AGs and immediately took action to post our notice to our website and to send a letter to the Open Meetings Compliance Board to let them know what had happened. And we acknowledged the violation at this meeting. We did not take the inadvertent error lightly and understand that, as always, but specifically in this virtual environment, our complete transparency is critical to public information and.
Madam Chair, you're muted. Madam Chair, you went mute.
Sorry about that. Moving forward, we will always ask our staff at the end of each meeting or before we go into closed session to give us a 3, 2, 1 countdown to the termination of the live stream to avoid inadvertently excluding the public from any part of the public meeting. This will make sure all members and the public understand when the live stream is ending and will avoid another premature closing of the live stream meeting to the public. Do any of the IAC members have any questions about that information? All right, hearing none, we are going to begin our agenda with a meeting called to order, which I have done. Can we have the roll call?
I'll do the roll call. Madam Chair, Ms. Alvera?
Present.
Secretary Churchill?
Present.
Ms. Eberhardt?
Present.
Mr. Gibbons?
Present.
Senator Casemeyer?
Present.
Senator Lala?
Present.
And Secretary McCord?
Present.
And, of course, Dr. Salmon.
Present. Thank you very much.
You have a full group.
Full complement.
Dick Lombardo is also here.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Mr.
Yes,
Lombardo. I missed you. I apologize.
Quite hard.
Just wanted to make a note that you have some correspondence from Wicomico County on the 2022 Capital Improvement Program 90% allocation in your materials. Do we have any public comment today?
Madam Chair, none.
All right, well, thank you. So looking ahead at our agenda, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda, which is in pages 1 through 29 in your agenda materials.
So moved, Madam Chair. Lala.
Thank you, Senator. Do we have a second? Second from Ms. Alvera. All in favor, please say aye or say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Mr. Schoen.
The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to move to section 2, which is pages 30 on your agenda materials, and invite Alex Donahue, who is our Deputy Director for Field Operations, to present on the design funding eligibility. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. It's good to see you all. It's my privilege this morning to report back to you and follow up to the request made at the last meeting by Chair Salmon and Member Eberhardt for information about potentially funding design for state-funded projects. This item is informational and does not require IAC action. As Bob has frequently noted, getting a school building to serve its intended purpose as well as fiscally sustainably, over its functional lifespan takes good planning and careful design work that must start well before construction can take place. How effectively and efficiently a facility functions depends on many small decisions, including about the spaces it contains, how it's laid out, the materials and systems built into it, and much more. Getting these things right takes effort and money. However, as a former principal, I can attest that the benefits of getting these right are worth it and manifest themselves every single day for teachers and students and staff. While design costs may only amount to something less than 3% of the total cost of ownership over 30 years, it's not pennies. It can be upwards of $2 million on a small school and much more on a large one. As noted in your agenda item, the state used to participate in funding design, but it was eliminated somewhere back in history, most likely due to fiscal constraints. But some LEAs, particularly low-wealth LEAs, struggle to provide sufficient design funding to support their portfolios and to bring projects to readiness for implementation when state and local funds become available. Staff believe that making design and other project expenses eligible for state funding will increase equity among LEAs and will facilitate more successful and definitely more timely project execution, resulting in more efficient and meaningful use of state dollars allocated each year. Pending your feedback, staff proposed to take the steps listed in the agenda item to draft potential changes to the IAC's regulations to support funding design work and to obtain feedback from LEAs and stakeholders on these proposed regulations. We stand for any questions you may have and welcome your feedback on this proposal.
Alex, I have a question. What's the timeline for getting feedback from the LEAs?
Bob, would you like to answer or shall I?
Go ahead, Alex.
So we would like to move very quickly to obtain feedback from LEAs such that these changes can be considered for the FY23 CIP cycle. You know, as everyone has seen, we do provide instructions and notifications well in advance for these processes. We know that LEAs need to factor the information into their long-term planning, and so we will be looking to move very quickly to connect and obtain the feedback.
That sounds really good. Other questions for Alex about this process? Seeing none. Thank you, Alex. I'm really encouraged by this direction, and I look forward to hearing the results of the feedback from the LEAs.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move to our next section of the agenda, which is COMAR revisions, and I'm going to invite Cassandra, who is our program support administrator. This material is included on your agenda, pages 32 to 38, and this will require a motion. Cassandra, good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. So item 3 includes a number of proposed COMAR amendments. But before I go into what those amendments are, there are a couple of things that I want to note. First, and really importantly, these proposed revisions, the action that the IAC takes on those today is simply to publish them in the Maryland Register and open them for a period of public comment. So this is not a final action by the IAC, it's just a preliminary action. I also want to note that the changes are not in the appropriate division of state documents format because we have learned that that can be a little bit hard for our stakeholders to understand. So instead, we have just tracked the changes. You'll see them stricken or underlined if we added new text. And in instances where they were kind of hard to see, you'll also see them highlighted. Before we begin to review the specific changes, I also want to call special attention to one change that you'll see on page 36 of your agenda. There are 2 changes that are highlighted here. They're very small, about a third of the way down the page and about 2/3 of the way down the page. So we as your staff always try to discuss any substantive COMAR changes with the LEAs extensively before we bring proposed changes to the IAC. These particular changes that we're bringing in this item today were not thought to be, we felt like they were mostly procedural in nature. So we didn't start the conversation with the LEAs as early as we normally would have. The changes that you see on page 36 would adjust the IAC's current process to use 5-year enrollments rather than 7-year enrollment projections in the IAC CIP application process. It's a change that we've been discussing internally and with the LEAs for well over a year. I think we started these conversations when House Bill 1783 passed in 2018. The change would bring the enrollment projections into alignment with the other figures submitted by the LEAs in their 5 and 10-year EFMPs. And we also just understand that 5-year projections are far more realistic than 7-year projections because it's difficult to anticipate that far into the future. However, and this is the really important part, since the publication of the IAC agenda, we have become aware that some LEAs do have concerns about this change. So to make sure that we continue to engage them as much as possible before the IAC does anything, we are recommending that the IAC actually exclude this one particular provision from consideration today. So if you all agree with that recommendation, I can make a minor change when I read the motion at the end of my presentation, and we'll exclude this provision so that we can take it back out to the LEAs and bring it to you at a later date. So with your permission, Madam Chair, I can stand for questions on that before I proceed.
Yes, any questions about pulling that out? Secretary McCord.
I don't really have a question. I think that's a good idea, Cassandra. I appreciate that you thought that through. The issue that I raised with my folks in planning was how many of the LEAs are in counties that may have adequate public facility ordinances that are set at a 7-year time frame as opposed to a 5-year time frame. I think you'll be hearing that, but we'd like to be consistent, and we'd like them to know that if the change is going to happen, that they need to consider whether their adequate public facilities ordinances need to change as a result of this change. Not necessarily, but I think that's a consideration, because as communities are planned based on school capacity, if they're looking at a 7-year time frame, we need to understand that's what's happening in some of these jurisdictions where the LEA is. So that's the issue I bring up with coordination with the LEAs and their adequate public facility ordinances, if any, in the jurisdiction in which it might be a 7-year time frame as opposed to a 5-year time frame.
Okay.
So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Excellent point. Other questions or any concerns about pulling these two changes? It's just in two places on page 36. All right, sounds like we're ready to go, Cassandra, so you can proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the most significant proposed change in the revisions that you're looking at today, you'll see at the top of page 35 of your agenda, and it adjusts COMAR to allow forward funding of systemic projects that meet some specific requirements. This came up recently because there was an LEA that mistakenly proceeded with a systemic project that was deemed eligible in last year's CIP, but was deferred due to fiscal constraints. You'll recall that a few months ago, the IAC actually approved a waiver of this provision of COMAR to allow that LEA to receive reimbursement for the project. Because of that incident, the IAC staff began to consider whether or not revisions to this section of COMAR should be made, and ultimately determined that as long as a project was reviewed and deemed eligible in a prior year CIP, and that project has been submitted to the Department of General Services for design review, there's no reason that an LEA shouldn't be permitted to proceed with the project as a forward funded project. The next proposed modification you'll see is to update the definition of a limited renovation project to make architectural enhancements optional. This change is at the top of page 33 of your agenda. You'll see that currently a limited renovation is defined as an upgrade to a building which must include a minimum of 5 building systems and widespread architectural enhancements. The IAC heard both through the work of the Educational Development Specifications Work Group and the work group of the Assessment and Funding of School Facilities that there's a desire for the IAC to streamline its processes and requirements. While architectural enhancements sometimes make sense as part of a multi-systemic project, we don't want to require that an LEA include those architectural enhancements if they don't make sense for the specific facility. So this change is really just about giving LEAs much needed flexibility in how they execute their projects. The next change, it's also on page 35, just revises the number of days that the LEAs have to respond to maintenance assessments to 45 days from the current 30-day requirement. This change is being recommended to align the regulations with the IAC's new maintenance effectiveness assessment requirements, which were based upon feedback from the LEAs that they did need a little bit more time to get us those responses. I'm going to backtrack a little bit to page 34 of your agenda. You'll see a change that modifies the requirement for educational specifications to clarify that they're only required for new renovation and renovation addition projects, but not for limited renovation projects. Again, this change brings COMAR into alignment with current and really just common sense practices for projects with a limited scope that don't require a full educational specification. Finally, on page 38, you'll see proposed regulations that strike fast track from the allowable methods of project delivery. So fast track projects are projects where a portion of the project begins construction while other portions of the project are still in design. We don't see this regulation get a lot of use in the IAC. I've never seen it used in the time that I've worked here, and it's really not a best practice. So we're recommending that this language is stricken entirely. And then the last couple of changes I want to note are just some small technical corrections. On page 35, you'll see that we're striking the Board of Public Works from 1439-02-28 in accordance with the statutory changes that were enacted in 2018. And on page 33, you'll see a minor technical correction that just corrects a cross-reference to another section of COMAR. I can stand for questions and I can read the motion.
Questions for Cassandra on any of the proposed changes? And just to reiterate for everyone, this is just to publish for a comment period. This is not to approve the changes. Seeing no hands, oh, I'm sorry, Secretary Churchill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Cassandra, thank you for the explanation. Always very thoughtful in terms of the approach from the staff. And this really isn't a comment to the proposed changes because I think they're appropriate. But in terms of, and maybe should be just addressed later, I just want to bring up being a part of the process when we're looking at streamlining processes and requirements. Just want to be cognizant of any change it may have or consequential effect it may have on our other processes like waivers. We talked about the one project that we had to approve a waiver for. So that would just be for all projects, for systemic and for large projects. If we could take a look at how our waiver process is now affected. Just for my own clarification, other than the one project in the past that we did issue a waiver for that was systemic, were the LEAs asking, was there a greater demand for this type of funding support? And I'll stop there.
No, only not official requests, but we wanted to make sure that we're trying to improve the learning environments for children. So for an LEA to have to pause a project from moving forward when they could, that would improve the learning conditions, just so that they can fit into our regulations, really didn't have any logical sense to it. So we thought if it is eligible, then we should do whatever we can to move it forward. That conserves costs too. It avoids inflation. I don't know why it was put in that way to begin with. Maybe there was a resistance to the state being an investor in maintenance capital systems replacements. My personal opinion is that ought to be a local cost, but that's a whole different conversation from it's on our plate now. We may as well do it the best we can.
It's always good to be forward thinking. And so I think it was good to explain to the public, some of the background behind it. So thank you for that clarification, Bob.
Thank you, Secretary Churchill. Cassandra, would you read the motion with the amended part?
Yes, Madam Chair. So the motion is to approve amendments to COMAR 14.39.01. In this next section, there is a minor change. Your agenda says it's 14.39.02.02. It's actually 14.39.02.10. 0.13, 0.14, 0.17, 0.28. The motion will not include 14.39.03.03, which is the change from the 7 to the 5 years. So to approve amendments to COMAR 1439.01, 10, 13, 14, 1728, and 14.39.04.03, and to approve the repeal of 14.39.04.09 as presented in this item, and to authorize staff to make additional technical edits as necessary. The proposed COMAR revisions will be published in the Maryland Register and will be open for public comment for a period of at least 30 days before returning to the IAC for final approval.
Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved by Secretary McCord. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Denise. All in favor, please show or say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Mr. Schoen?
The vote carried unanimously.
Great. Thank you so much, Cassandra. And now we're going to move on to section 4 and invite Arabia Davis, our funding programs manager, to present on 3 project cancellations from Howard County. Good morning, Arabia.
Good morning. Howard County Public School System is seeking approval to cancel the building envelope project at Long Reach High School to allow the LEA time to adjust the project scope and budget. The request also includes cancellation of the roof and HVAC project at Fulton Elementary School because the projects were submitted out of sequence. The LEA is asking that funding from the 3 projects totaling $1.9 million be transferred to their prior year appropriations account. They've also indicated to staff that their preference would be to apply those dollars to the FY22 CIP. Staff supports the LEA's request for approval. I'm available for questions.
Questions for Arabia about the cancellation requests? All right, hearing none. Arabia, can you read the motion?
Yes. To approve at the request of Howard County Public School System, the cancellation of 3 previously approved CIP projects shown in the table below and transfer of $9,187,807 to the LEA's reserved appropriations account.
Do I have a motion to approve?
I approve. I move.
Thank you, Ms. Eberhardt. Second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Gibbons. All in favor, please show or say aye.
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 Any abstentions? Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Schoen?
I agree with you, Dr. Salmon. The motion carries unanimously. No worries.
I was usurping your authority there for a minute. All right. Thank you, Arabia. And now we're going to continue with you presenting on the fiscal year 2022 approval of 90% of our capital improvement program recommendations. Arabia, this is in sections 41 through 59 of our materials, so please begin.
Yes. Today, the Commission been asked to adopt the 90% allocations based on a proposed capital budget of $250 million. Back in December, the projections were based on a preliminary budget of $280 million. Given the $30 million reduction, funding adjustments were necessary. The IAC received a total of 210 project requests, totaling $694 million. And the CIP team this round is recommending funding for 70 projects totaling $225 million. Planning approvals without funding are generally recommended in the final round, as the IAC will have a better idea of the state's funding obligations. Each project being presented for funding has been determined to be eligible based on assessments performed by our facility maintenance staff, evaluation of the project scopes performed by the CIP team, whether the project is ready to move forward, and to address the backlog of previously approved projects. Next, I'd like to walk you through the CIP summary on page 43. Columns A through E reflect the original target allocation, total project funds being requested, the total number of projects being recommended, while the funding amounts approved at the 75% round in columns F has not changed, while has changed slightly by budget modifications that were due to projects being swapped out, as well as the shifting of funding between projects. The previously projected recommendations for February and May are shown in columns G and I. The funding adjustments being recommended is shown in column H. As you can see, the funding for a number of the LEAs has either been reduced or removed. These changes are being offered to meet the statutory requirement for this round. Staff shaved $22 million from projects, so now the February recommendations totals 15% or $15 million. This number includes $1 million instead of $5 million that staff requests be held in the state's reserve fund to accommodate unexpected project costs. If we compare columns I and J, the difference is $3 million less at the final round, bringing the total project funding in May to $25 million. The impact of the adjustments affected 20 jurisdictions. Funding for 4 LEAs, Garrett County, Queen Anne's County, Somerset County, and Talbot County, as well as the Maryland School for the Blind, are not being recommended for funding modifications because full funding for these projects were recommended and approved in December. Column K is the total new authorization being recommended, well, projected to be recommended. The preliminary funding from the Enrollment Growth and Classroom Initiative is shown in column L. To provide some level of relief, we are recommending that the state's reserve funds from FY 2021 and the LEA's reserved appropriations account be applied to projects as shown in columns M and N that total a little more than $30 million. The total projected recommendations are shown in column O and are subject to change based on the final capital budget and any new programs that may come through the 2021 legislative session. The CIP team has made every effort to fully fund capital maintenance projects. However, in some cases, we were not successful. In those cases, team members reached out to the LEA to determine how they would like to proceed. In the case of Allegheny County, the LEA felt that partial funding for that second project was sufficient. In Baltimore City, funding was moved up from priority number 16 to make higher projects whole. In the case of Charles County, funding was shifted between projects. The IAC's Facilities Maintenance Group, our school's facilities branch, the regional facility managers, and the Department of General Services and the Maryland Department of Planning continue to collaborate with the LEAs that have projects shown as deferred due to outstanding issues. The letter from Wacomico County requesting full funding for Beaver Run has been included along with the agenda. At this time, the team is unable to project full funding. Their projected allocations total $9.7 million. I am available for questions.
Thank you, Arabia. And what questions do you have? Secretary Churchill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's not so much of a question. It's more of a statement concerning the process. And Madam Chair, you and I know we've seen a fair amount of these. I just want to give an accommodation to Arabia and the entire team on their job to put this together. My understanding is that there's, with additional staff, there's been a greater in-depth analysis of this and that the process has moved very smoothly, which is expected and will continue in future years. So that's all I want to say, is just to give an accommodation to all the hard work that it takes to move this through. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary, for that comment. And I will just add that indeed, we have moved to a much better place than we have been in the past in making these very, very difficult decisions. and we have expert staff in all areas now working to make these decisions. So it is really been successful. And so we thank you, Arabia, and all the people that have had a part in this team effort. Other questions? All right, would you read the motion, Arabia?
Yes, to adopt the fiscal year 2022 90% capital improvement program IAC staff recommendations for each school system and the Maryland School for the Blind, totaling $225 million, as shown in the summary of project requests and recommendations, and to provide the recommendations to the presiding officers and the budget committees of the General Assembly and the Department of Legislative Services.
Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Secretary Churchill, do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Gibbons. All in favor, please say or show aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Mr. Sean,
The motion carried unanimously.
thank you. Thank you, Arabia.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to move on to area 6 of your agenda, which is the approval of a property disposition in Carroll County, New Windsor Middle School. And I'm going to invite Kim Spivey, who is our Deputy Director of Administration, to join us. And this is on page 60 of your. Good morning, Kim.
Good morning, Dr. Salmon and members of the Commission. Item 6 before the Commission today is for the disposition by sale of the New Windsor Middle School in Carroll County. The Board of Ed and the Carroll County government have followed the notifications required for the disposition of this facility and have received previous approvals by the BPW and the IAC with conditions for the repayment of the outstanding bond debt and payment to the state of its proportional share of the net sale proceeds. The county has satisfied the repayment of the outstanding bond debt. This item is based on the state's calculation of its proportional share of the sale proceeds. The calculation considers the portion of the local investment of land, building, and expenditures to maintain and prepare the property for sale, and then the state's construction investment in the building only. The IAC staff have used this methodology and calculated the state's proportionate share of the proceeds at 28.10% based on the state's proportional share of the construction cost of the original facility in 1995. This item requires the county to pay the state its proportional share of the net sale proceeds in the amount of $1,397,905 in alignment with the scheduled receipt of the sale proceeds. Are there any questions?
Questions for Kim on this item? Seeing none, Kim, would you read the motion, please?
Yes. To approve the disposition by sale of the New Windsor Middle School located at 1000 Green Valley Road, New Windsor, Maryland, by the County Commissioners of Carroll County to the New Windsor Holding LLC with the agreement that the county government pay the state its proportional share in accordance with COMAR 14.39.02.25C of the net sale proceeds of $1,397,905 as follows. At settlement, $38,677. 1 year after settlement, $110,506. 2 years after settlement, $1,248,722.
Do I have a motion to approve?
Move.
Ms. Eberhardt, thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Lombardo, thank you. All in favor, please or show aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Mr. Schoen?
The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Kim.
Okay, thank you.
Now we're moving on to section 7, property status change items. There's 2. We're going to invite Michael from planning. He is the manager of infrastructure and development. This is on page 61 of your agenda. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Dr. Salmon and members of the commission. I have 2 property items for you today. The first one will require a vote, and the second one is informational. So for the first one, just to clarify, this is a property reacquisition by the Montgomery County Public Schools of the former Parkside Elementary School site. The Montgomery County Board of Education is requesting approval from the IAC to reacquire from the Montgomery County government the 6.19 acre site occupied by the former Parkside Elementary School in Silver Spring for use as a holding school for elementary students as the Silver Spring International Middle School and Sligo Creek Elementary School addition project is completed. In Montgomery County, the superintendent's capital budget and CIP identifies several Montgomery County schools in the Down County consortium that need classroom additions or major capital projects to accommodate enrollment growth. Included in the CIP is a project to address employment challenges at Silver Spring International and Sligo Elementary School. These facilities share a campus, and any capital project would affect both schools. In February of 2020, Superintendent Smith recommended delaying this project by 1 year to reevaluate the project due to increased construction costs and operational considerations, including the construction of the Purple Line. This recommendation included the relocation of Sligo Creek Elementary School to the former Parkside Elementary School in fall of 2021. The Montgomery County Board of Education previously conveyed this school to Montgomery County in 1976. Last summer, staff reviewed the site with the county's Office of Real Estate and the current tenant, Montgomery Parks, and Park staff indicated that the agency anticipated vacating the property in August of 2020. Upon the IAC's approval of this action, Montgomery County will prepare a quitclaim deed and release the property to the Board of Education at no cost. I stand for any questions.
Questions for Michael? All right, do a motion. Can you read the motion, Michael?
Yes. The motion is to approve the reacquisition by the Montgomery County Board of Education of 6.19 acres of land at 9500 Brunette Avenue in Silver Spring, Maryland, 20901, occupied by the former Parkside Elementary School from the Montgomery County government for use as a holding school for elementary students in the Down County Consortium in the fall of 2021, adhering to the actions identified in the State Clearinghouse Review State Identifier MD 1007-0871.
Any questions? Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved, Madam Chair. Lala.
Thank you, Senator. Do we have a second? Secretary McCord?
Second, thank you.
All in favor, show or say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Mr. Schoen?
The motion carried unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Michael. Go on to your second one.
Yes. So the next item is a set of easements that go to the IAC as informational items because they are less than 1 acre. There are several of them in Charles County, Harford County, and Montgomery County. They're all described on page 62 of your packet, so I can answer any questions if you have any, but this is informational in nature.
Okay, these are Charles County, 2, 1 in Harford, and 2 in Montgomery. Any questions for Michael on these easements? Hearing none. Thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate the information. And now we're going to move on to section 8, and we're going to invite Jamie to give us our update on Baltimore City projects. Good morning, Jamie.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. It's real good to see you all. I'm before you today to deliver item 8. It's informational, and it is a status report on the Baltimore City extra $15 million for HVAC projects. The item can be found on page 63 and 64 of your meeting agenda. I will just jump right in and stand for questions when I'm through. Starting with project phase, we still have 1 project in design, 2 in procurement, 5 in construction, and 11 are now operational. With the commission's approval of contracts in item 1B, the 2 projects in procurement will soon be in construction. And with improvements online at Commodore John Rogers PK to 8 and at Frederick Douglass High School, 11 of the 19 extra $15 million for HVAC projects are now operational. That is 58%. Moving on to project status, we have 2 projects that are behind by 2 months or more, 2 projects that are behind by less than 2 months, 3 that are on time, 1 that is ahead, and 11 are operational. Just a note, looking back over the entirety of the program so far, scope changes have caused most of the project delays, like at Liberty Elementary School, Thomas Johnson, PK-8, and Windsor Hills. And those scope changes were anticipated because construction funds were allocated before project design had even started. So some lower priority projects have been canceled, and some lower priority projects have been delayed. And also, in order to get the most out of this program, the LEA has contributed about $2 million in local capital in order to make the most of the extra $15 million projects. That said, it is great also that Margaret Brett was operational 6 months ahead of schedule, and Frederick Douglass High School was operational 4 months ahead of schedule. Moving on to contract status. At this time, all 15 million of the 15 million have been allocated. At this time, $10,370,608, or 69%, has been contracted, and about $1.4 million has been expended this month. So to date, $6,658,301, or 44%, has been expended. 2 more contracts, as I mentioned, were approved via item 1B with a combined total of $3.5 million, which means that as of February 11th, $13,870,984, which is 92% of the extra $15 million for HVAC, have been contracted. That is my report for this month. If I can answer any questions, I would be glad to.
Questions for Jamie on the update? Secretary McCord. He just said it was, go ahead.
Just to say thank you. Just to say thank you, Jamie. And I like the progress, and I am very much in all of what you're able to do to keep things moving along here. So thank you very much.
Jamie, I just have one question, and I keep forgetting to ask you, and I'm holding this up so that folks, I hope, can see this. What program created this matrix for us to have such great information? What are you using to create this?
This is not high tech. This is low tech Excel.
Okay.
It's just been developed over time. So
it's really excellent, and it's full of information just on one page. So it's really great. So thanks so much.
Much appreciated.
All right. Okay. Well, we are now moving on to section 9 of our agenda, which is a track on our legislation that has anything to do with the IAC. I heard somewhere where I think, and I'm sure our senators remember the days of bill dropping, but I think we had over 1,000 bills in one, I think in the House, and about 900 in the Senate this year. And so Cassandra's here to walk us through the few bills, and they're not few, there are several bills that we wanted you to be aware of. So I'm going to turn it over now to Cassandra. This is informational only, and look forward to hearing your report, Cassandra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to note that we did revise the agenda to include this item. You all know that session rapidly evolves, so we wanted to get you the most recent information we could. I understand that some folks may have accessed the link from the former agenda before this item was added. I just put the link to the updated agenda in the chat box in case anyone isn't able to see this item on pages 65 of your agenda. So I just want to get everybody on the same page.
Page 66.
Page 66. Thank you, Bob. So session is exciting every year. This year is certainly no exception. So beginning on page 66, you're going to find your first 2021 IAC legislation tracker. As the chair mentioned, this is a listing of all of the bills that the IAC is currently following. Session's still gearing up, so none of these bills have been enacted, and I'm not going to go through every one in detail, but there are a couple that are significant that I want to point out. So if you move to page 68 of your agenda, you'll see Senate Bill 551, the School Construction Incentive Act of 2021. This legislation is significant because it introduces a concept that was conceived by the Work Group on Educational Development Specifications and that was later endorsed by the Work Group on the Assessment and Funding of School Facilities. I do want to note that a number of the members of this commission have been directly involved with this initiative. Mr. Gibbons and Mr. Lombardo both served on the Ed Specs Work Group, which Director Gorel chaired, alongside LEA representatives, legislators, architects, and others. Also of note, the sponsor of the bill, Senator Rosa Pepp, also served on that work group. And after the Ed Specs work group completed their work, the assessment and funding work group picked this up. And of course, Madam Chair, you were also the chair of that work group. So every step of the way, the IAC, this body, has been kept apprised of the recommendations of these work groups. And this incentive is something that you all have discussed at length over the last couple of years. Bob was invited by the sponsor of the bill yesterday to testify on the legislation at the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee. The other item of note that I want to talk about isn't found on your legislative report, but it's still worth mentioning. In the 2020 session, House Bill 1, the Built to Learn Act of 2020, did pass both chambers and was enacted. However, the bill contained a provision tying its enactment to the passage of the blueprint or the Kirwan Commission bill. Because the blueprint bill was vetoed, House Bill 1 did not take effect. The Built to Learn Act was a major school construction bill that allows the Maryland Stadium Authority to issue special revenue bonds to fund up to $2.2 billion in school construction projects. It's worth noting right now, because earlier this week, the House overturned the governor's veto of the blueprint bill. If the Senate also overrides the governor's veto, then the Built to Learn Act of 2020 will immediately go into effect. So as your staff, we've started to take a hard look at the steps that would need to be taken to implement the legislation. If it is enacted, we'll come back to you with a lot more information about the requirements of the legislation. One provision that is of note in light of today's agenda is that that bill would immediately make design funding an eligible cost. So there are a number of other bills that are currently working their way through the legislative process. The only other note I would add is that if any of the IAC members or any of our stakeholders have questions about this legislation, your staff are always happy to answer those. We just need to be contacted. And with that, I can stand for questions.
Questions for Cassandra about any of the bills that have been included? Ms. Everhart?
Yes, when you said that it is eligible for design funding, it's just that 2.2 billion, or is it for all the projects that the IAC is doing?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ms. Eberhardt. It would be for all of the IAC's projects through the 2.2 billion and also through our regular capital improvement program.
Okay. But we would still need to change COMAR to make that effective?
Yes, we would.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good question. Other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you. Bob,
I'm sorry. Yeah, I want to make a point that the COMAR, once the law passes, it's the COMAR can catch up to it, but COMAR is a regulation to identify clarity. As soon as the law passes, we would have to start acting. We will add the clarity as quickly as we can.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. All right. That brings us to the end of our agenda today. I want to thank everybody. Please continue to be safe, and also with the weather that we're having today. And we'll see you next month. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Dick Lombardo? Do we have a second? Secretary Ford. We have a lot of seconds. There we go. Okay, well, listen, everybody take care. Let's all say aye to adjourn.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any opposed? Elliot?
Motion carried. You are.
All right. All right. Thank you, everybody. Please take care.
Thank you, members. Great to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.